Introducing Janet Cunningham to all of you. I suspect most of you already know Janet because she is one of the cornerstones in my life as a past life regression therapist. She and I connected through IBRT in the 1980s, and then she became president for, was it 2 cycles, I think? 2 cycles?
I think so.
2 cycles.
Yeah.
And then she got involved with IBRT at the very early stages after one of our founding members, Thelma Friedman, passed. Janet came on and became president at that point. So she's the 3rd generation of IBRT presidents, and she just recently retired. And now she's back, which is wonderful. I hesitated in contacting you, Janet, thinking, poor dear, she just retired, but we needed you. And we're glad you're here.
The timing was good. The timing, you let me rest for a year. Almost.
And she was one of my teachers. She actually came to my institute and taught a class. At one point, what was it you taught? I think it was something the board did something. But we had board meetings at my office, and that's how I got to know Janet much better. And she has taught all over the planet. I know a lot about the Turkish people because many of the people she taught are members of IBRT now. Yeah. And I also know Egypt was one of the places that you went. So
I believe you're on.
She's been a busy woman, 9 books plus, a publishing company, a practice. She well deserves to have some retirement now. But here she is. She's going to share her wisdom and her expertise of how to work with anomalous cases. Anomalous ways that past life events unfold in sessions, which we can all use help with. So thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Yeah. Thanks. It is just so nice to see familiar faces.
Right.
Guys, great. And new faces as well. Before I begin, I really want to say how proud I am of this organization. We have I can see the excitement of new ideas and positive steps and the creativity, especially the past 2 to 3 years. It's really been terrific. And the IBRT board of directors is fantastic. I can tell that immediately. Great. So my talk is going to be about unexpected challenges during regression work. I'm referring to kind of a typical regression, which moves through and works out beautifully. And sometimes there are just these unexpected things that happen. And that's what I want to tell you about. I'm going to tell you about 3 stories. And then afterwards, feel free to ask me any questions about anything that I've said. Now, these 3 stories took place a long time ago, so my memory, I hope, will be able to answer your questions. I think from my point of view, the sharing with each other that we can do with things like this, because I'm sure that all of you have your own stories also, that you can say, I expected it to go this way, and then it went that way. And I'm sure you all have your own stories about that. As we share those experiences with each other, I think it really helps to expand our own consciousness, including as we expand our own consciousness, especially the ones that I'm talking about, we begin to get a feeling of faith that we are being guided, and we can tap into, I think, the wisdom that we already know, but we don't know until we are stuck into these unexpected experiences. Just for curiosity, have any of you gone to Egypt for the purpose of exploring a past life? Okay, just my own curiosity. First, I want to explain.
Wait, I'm sorry. Do you mean been in a past life in Egypt or visited the country?
Visited the country with the intention of, yeah, curiosity on my part. First, I want to explain how our exploration in Egypt began, because this is story number 1. the energy of Egypt. And so long after IBRT existed, Association for Past Life Regression Therapy, 3 of those pioneers, Doctors Ron Jew, Winifred Lucas, and Hazel Denning, founded a training program in 1994 called the Professional Institute of Regression Therapy, PIRT or PERT. They only had it for maybe 4 or 5 years, because they were all getting older at that time. But I was really honored to be on the faculty with these icons in our field. And so the retreat was December 3rd through to the 12th, December 3 to 12 in 1994 in California. Doing such training retreats, as far as I'm sure that you all know, it has valuable information and speeches, and it's common for students to be separated into smaller groups for individual practice sessions. So whenever my group arrived, I was surprised that all 8 of the women already knew each other. That's totally unusual. They already knew each other because they had attended some of Ron Jew's classes in his office in California. So as I began to explain the process of dividing into partners and taking turns with one being the therapist and one being the client, my group of women collectively had other plans. And they wanted me to do a regression with the entire group. They'd heard of my book, A Try Return, in which I did that. But this was entirely different. I was not supposed to be doing that at this training. And I'm a person who's really used to and comfortable with following the rules. You know, give me the rules, I'll follow them. And what would Ron say if he found out that I was doing a group regression? But my enthusiastic group of women felt strongly that they had been together and they won. So I had them sit in a semicircle in chairs and began guiding them into a past life memory where they were together, if in fact they were together before. And that's a very important piece to add, because sometimes it's not true. They think they were and they weren't. So the women accustomed to such things, such altered states, went into an altered state. And as I guided those beginning stages, approximately 4 or 5 of the 8 recognized themselves to be in Egypt. And they started to share and explain what they were perceiving as I went to one at a time. After we had gotten just started getting going, right at that time, Ron Jew and Hazel Denning knocked on the door. I suggested that the group stay where they were, and I opened the door halfway and stuck my head out. Ron had a camera around him, and he wanted to take a group photo. I kind of whispered to them, asking them to come back a little later. Hazel looked surprised, and Ron looked confused, but they left, started to walk down the hallway. I later understood that Ron said to Hazel, "What is going on in there?" Immediately, one of the women said, "Call Ron back. He's supposed to be here." And the others agreed. I opened the door and called them to come back. I whispered a few words to them about what we were doing, and they walked in and sat in chairs at the back of the room while I continued. As the regression progressed, there was more of an awareness of each other, eventually recognizing that there were political uprisings and some challenges among the priests and priestesses that they were reaching into the bureaucracy of the kingdom. And in the regression, as the energy began to raise, the women in the group were becoming more filled with fear and recognizing imminent danger. And it's hard to fully describe that, but I'm sure that you understand what I mean. They began to be more and more uncomfortable as they were describing what was going on. All of a sudden, as this imminent danger was mentioned, all of a sudden, from the back of the room, Ron burst into sobbing. And Hazel put her arm around him. Now that is just the background of the story of Egypt. Now I'm going to tell you the story. And I'll continue to what became my unexpected challenge. Sometime in January of 1995, I walked into my office and noticed a phone message on my answering machine. Yes, it was an answering machine. This was before cell phones. I kept rewinding the message 3 times, maybe even 10 times, because it was so unbelievable. Ron Jew said that there was a group tour going to Egypt, and he wanted to include a small seminar within the tour. He asked me to be co-leader with him. The trip was February 3 to the 21st, 1995. And any names that I may use of the participants have been changed. I think there's only 2. This tour had 2 different levels: exploring Egypt on an external level with a large group of people who had signed up for this professional tour. And it was called kind of the official tour. And we participated in all of that. The other level, the second level, involved our smaller seminar group that Ron had collected. And as we advertised it, people joined. And so our smaller group had an intention for each person to have an internal tour through Akashic records and soul memories. Our seminar group consisted of approximately 20 people, which included 5 out of the 8 women from California. So aside from the 5 women from California, the others in our seminar group were strangers. One woman, who I will call Elizabeth, confused me because she never smiled and seemed to be traveling alone and carried herself as being alone. She was tall, slim, wore her hair tightly back to her head in the back with a bun. Her stance and actions appeared rather rigid. She never shared in the conversations whenever we had our smaller group meetings. Yet she always attended all of our seminar meetings. Ron agreed with me that she was just a puzzlement. The entire trip was excruciating and overwhelming and fascinating, all at the same time. We traveled on several airplanes, buses, taxis, couple cruise ships, sailboats, horse-drawn carriages, ferry, and a choice of either riding on a horse or a camel. I chose a camel. And feet, a lot of walking. It was amazing. Just being in the powerful energies that exist in Egypt is hard to explain, as is true of many other spiritual locations on the planet. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have gone to some of those other places of had a spiritual tour. And the energy that remains is incredible. I recommend them. Although I wanted to go back to Egypt at one time, but now's not the time. And now I'm really comfortable not to go back because I understand more that in consciousness, we can go there. At least I think that if I can try that, I might be able to go again. From there were many fascinating parts from King Tut's Museum of Gold in Cairo, those pieces moved from his burial site, going to the Sphinx, the Great Pyramid, exploring paintings of hieroglyphs and gods and goddesses on temple walls, and we walked through burial sites of several kings. Our seminar group traveled with the larger group and had a separate time with Ron's guidance. As a result of his studies and knowledge, Ron led rituals, meditations, prayers, and toning for healing and cleansing in some of the temples that we went into. Our group sessions included discussions of memories or issues rising up that individuals needed to face or work on. Over lunch one day, 3 women brought up major issues they had with Elizabeth over past life memories of priests and sacrifices. Elizabeth is the person that I mentioned to you before, who was very straight and stern. At the same time, more and more people claimed to recognize someone in the seminar group as being with them in a past life. As various stories began to rise up, I began to become uneasy with the speed and certainty with discoveries being thrown out. It didn't have the slowness and the calm and the digging deeper. Things were speeding up and all the activities were going on too. And sometimes these discoveries that people made were just spontaneously thrown out. I think I began later on to recognize that one of my tasks was to be a grounding force for the group. If there's one rule that I've always had regarding regressions, the therapist is never to give suggestions. All information should rise from the client's perceptions. And I felt that people were really getting carried away. For example, just one example, while on a bus ride, a few voices could be heard announcing, "You were, he was, she did." And was it real? Was it guesswork? Was it a collective consciousness that existed in the land from ancient times? It seemed to me that things were getting out of hand. And I was very grounded mentally and feeling more uncomfortable. More than a few believed that Ron had been a pharaoh. Many signs seemed to indicate that as a possibility. Some referred to him as Ramses VI and others as Ramses II. Others considered, if not pharaoh, he'd been a high priest, which I suspected but never mentioned. While we were shopping, and we did have some time to shop, while we were shopping, a few women in our group just started gossiping at a show of wealth. A woman, Ellen, purchased a large, expensive, and beautiful scarab pin. I felt quite sure that those who were so offended would never have had such a reaction under other circumstances. Hostility began to spill out, and talk was rising that seemed to be recalling a time period of unrest in ancient Egypt, which included a fight for power and leadership. One woman was certain that she had been Ron's wife in that past life. Privately to me, he said he was inclined to agree, yet surprised when she started bossing him around. As I remember, she asked him to pick up a food item whenever we were all shopping, for him to pick up a food item for her to bring back to her. And then she scolded him for forgetting to do it. It was confusing. He didn't understand why she and others were getting so angry at him. When we got back to the hotel, Ron knocked on my door. When he walked in, he looked alarmed, saying, "Janet, what is going on here?" As I remember, this was our last day before we were scheduled to go into the Great Pyramid early the next morning. The following day, we would be headed home. And Ron said, "We have to handle this. I want you to do a group regression." That was the last thing that I wanted to do. But how could I say no? I agreed with him, but I really wanted him to do it. And I tried to get him to do it. Of course, he fell in the crosshairs of the anger, so he couldn't. He called a quick, and I said, okay, I would. He called for a quick meeting for everyone, and I felt stuck. I had to do the group regression for everyone in our seminar, not just the 5 people from California, but the 20 people who were a part of our seminar. Sitting in chairs in a large semicircle, I slowly began guiding participants into an altered state of consciousness and asking their unconscious mind to guide them into memories of a past life in Egypt, if in fact they were there. Soon I glanced around the room. A few had tears running down their faces. Some looked fiercely angry. A few appeared fearful, and some were having no connection or reaction at all. I knew that I needed to focus on those who were having strong reactions, so I called specific names of approximately 10 people and directed them to move forward to come closer to me, creating a new, smaller semicircle, such as, "Mary, you come forward and sit down. Peter, you come forward and sit down." Not you, Peter. and so a smaller group was collected. Someone called Aunt Elizabeth, who I mentioned before, to join the others. They saw her as a male leader in that lifetime. Did I know? I didn't know. She sat down with the others, and she remained in a rigid sitting. Soon, all in the smaller group were in an experienced memory between long-held spiritual teachings and initiations with high priests and priestesses, with a rising, vicious battle for power. Horrendous memories of statues of gods and goddesses were being destroyed, papyrus writings damaged, gold images carried away, and men and women running in fear. As the energy increased in the circle, there was joined recognition of a leader, possibly called Father, manically leading the murdering crowd, which included his children. In the midst of the memories, Elizabeth's strong voice was heard by everyone in the room saying, and I quote, "I was the father." Everyone in the room just took a deep breath. At this point in time, Ron came up to my back and leaned in and whispered in my ear that we had to leave in 10 minutes to go on the next tour. Okay, this was my challenge. What could I do to close this session at that point in time and get all of these people out the door without time to slowly ease the group of people out of what they were experiencing, to properly move into a place of comfort for everyone in the room I was really at a loss. 10 minutes, and we had to run out the door. I'm sure that I looked up to the heavens. I know that I silently asked for guidance. I've had to ask for help more than once from a higher level, often. And I had to let go of my feelings of responsibility to fix them all now. I automatically shifted to an intention for healing and asked everyone in the room to assist in healing memories of the past, memories of anger, hatred, victimhood, fear, blaming others, and self-blame. I honestly do not know what I said, whatever came into my mind at the time, as I kept looking at my watch. I asked that when they went to sleep that night, to welcome their higher self, bring healing into mind, body, and spirit as they slept in peace. Then we all ran out the door to the next tour. The next day, we gathered at sunrise. I think it was 4:00 a.m. or maybe 5:00 a.m., not any later. The tour had made special arrangements for our opportunity to go inside the Great Pyramid. From all the way down into the pit, which I'm not even going to try to explain. I did it. And then climbing up to the Queen's chamber and higher into the King's chamber. As we gathered outside that morning, we all looked around to be sure everyone had arrived. I asked if anyone had seen Elizabeth. And someone near me said that they had seen her the previous evening sitting at the bar talking to a couple of people. I looked around the group and was truly shocked. Elizabeth was smiling as she was talking to a couple of attendees. Her rigid stance was gone. Her hair was no longer pulled tightly to the back in a bun. It was freely falling to her shoulders. Again, I repeat, she was smiling. Now, take a deep breath because I'm going to take you to story number 2. Yikes. I know, I thought maybe this would be the time to ask questions, but no. We're moving on to another challenge that I had. And all three are very, very different. Story number 2 is about soul retrieval. And this took place in October or November of 1995 at my home office. Different times in my career, I've had office in the home, I've had offices outside the home. I've done regression work on the floors in convents. So I learned to be flexible. Past life therapy broadened over the years as a result of pioneers who have been open-minded and willing to learn from our clients. As a result, we are less likely to make quick judgments about what a past life regression may entail. Therapists and researchers have learned that past life therapy may involve a past life issue that was not resolved, an issue that began in the womb or in infancy, repressed childhood memories of sexual and/or other forms of abuse, psychic openings and experiences of the paranormal, dialoguing with an unborn fetus, or dialoguing with a deceased relative, processing a near-death experience, entity attachment, and/or alien abduction. And I'm sure that we could probably find some others. It's not uncommon for a therapist to begin what I call a typical past life regression and to find himself or herself in a very different set of circumstances than expected. And so I add to this list soul retrieval. Although this term has been used in numerous ways and with diverse meanings, I've not found a term that better describes what this experience was for me. Differing from situations where the client's images and memories are flowing from the unconscious, or when the client has the ability to dialogue with an entity, in this soul retrieval, the client became unable to easily extract herself from the situation. The experience seems to indicate that a portion of the soul energy of the client has been locked away, and she needs the energetic assistance of the therapist to retrieve the soul energy and to integrate the energy with more wholeness in her being. So now explain what happened. I'd been working with a woman who I will call Jill. She was in her mid-40s, formerly married 25 years, and then living with a lesbian lover. I had known Jill personally for several years, and she had always enjoyed the company of males as friends. But rather suddenly, she was making frequent statements about masculine energy not being good for her to be around, and emphasizing the positive aspects of feminine energy. Jill was not displaying anger at men as much as a desire to accentuate feminine energy at the expense of her masculine side. We set a time for her regression, and Jill wanted her partner, Diane, to be with her. I had done some work with Diane in the current life and past lives. And she also, as Jill, she also had pretty strong intuitive psychic ability and could easily go into an altered state to perceive and be with Jill. We were comfortably sitting on the floor in my home office, carpeted home office. And so in what I expected to be a rather ordinary past life regression, Jill went to a Mayan temple, and she saw herself as a spiritual leader or teacher, female, strong and powerful. She spoke of it in just loving terms. She loved her people, and they returned the love and admiration for her. As I moved her forward in time, Jill became more and more agitated with her people. They seemed to be worshiping her instead of the teachings. Strongly connected to her in the regression, I found myself gently urging her to express the anger that I knew she was containing and holding inside of her. Then she broke through the anger and indicated that she was killing her people in a blind rage. With a type of saber or machete, she was teaching them that they were to worship the gods, not to worship the living, meaning her. In the regression, her anger was volcanic. There was no hint or feeling of wrongdoing on her part while this was going on, until many of her people had been killed. And then she expressed shock with, "What have I done? What have I done? I have killed them." And then she took her own life. Needless to say, it had been a deeply emotional experience. As I moved Jill to the light, something rather unusual happened. She did not go. Instead, I felt Jill's consciousness move further and further away from me and away from the room. I glanced at Diane, and she looked frightened, whispering, "I can't find her, Janet." I asked again and got the same response. Jill's breathing slowed more and more. Her energy essence felt very distant from the room, and she was quiet for a long time. When I asked where she was, she could barely move her lips to respond. Her whisper was only air with no audible words. It was as if she had no energy left in her body to assist. With my ear at her mouth, I asked again and got the same response, an attempt to whisper with even less energy. In my own silence, I asked, begged for higher guidance, and knew that I had to go to her at where she was in consciousness. I have to pause and say, this did not come from an intellect. It just came from whatever I was bringing up. So I knew that I had to go to her with where she was in consciousness and energetically bring her back. In a regression, even though I'm intuitively perceiving, I am emphatic about keeping myself out of the client's experience, as I mentioned earlier. I do not lead or direct, but this was different. This required my going into her experience with her. Holding Jill's left hand with my right, I told her that I was coming after her to bring her safely back. I spoke slowly and softly, as I said the words that came into my mouth at the time. I included explanations about how she had locked a portion of her soul away in darkness, indications of forgiveness from her people. I encouraged her forgiveness of herself, reminding her that she had work to do on the earth with greater wholeness and balance, and directions to follow my voice to the light. For a long time, I had to use my sensing of where her consciousness was. Her outer responses were non-existence. I kept talking to her, repeating forgiveness and instructions to rejoin her soul energy for greater balance. I have no idea how long it took. This time I was not looking at my watch or a clock. I have no idea how long it took before Jill began to respond. I know that it was a very long time. But I knew that I was with her in consciousness and I was going to stay with her as long as it took. Changes were almost imperceptible initially, except through my sensing of where she was. At the slightest willingness of the soul portion to move, mentally, I began to try pulling energetically while gently and firmly directing Jill to follow my voice, coming back into the room fully with a loving acceptance of the wholeness of her soul energy. As I mentioned, Jill was very psychic, and we had done a lot of work together that was out of the ordinary. Eventually, she came back into the room, and when she came back into the room, she was in wonder, saying, "Janet, I didn't know where I was. It was just darkness. The only thing I could sense was your soul presence. It was that energy and your voice that brought me back. I didn't have the strength to get out of that place." We followed up the session with discussions of how Jill may have interpreted her ending acts in that life as masculine power out of control. And she may have locked a portion of her soul energy away, not trusting that aspect of herself. We discussed the importance of balance and using her masculine and feminine power in positive and loving ways for herself and others. Jill called me the next day, recognizing a difference. And as the months went by, it seemed that she was indeed acquiring more acceptance and better balance with her own masculine and feminine energy. I considered that experience to be one of the most unusual past life regressions that we sometimes run across. It was published in the Journal of Regression Therapy in December of 1995. That's a journal that used to exist, and Holly might have some connections to this. I'm not real sure. Okay, are you breathing with me? You okay? You ready for story number 3? Then I'll stop. Story number 3 is lighter and happier. And this one, well, they were all happy. This one, I'm going to assume that you're going to recognize some of the messages for you yourself. And this is actually, I actually wrote this in one of the president's newsletters some time ago. This is exploring the interlife, but it has a little bit of a difference and amazing messages that this woman had from the interlife. This experience took place in December 1994 in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was on staff at PERT, Professional Institute of Regression Therapy, which I described to you in story number 1. We were having a board meeting, and the subject of a variety of lectures and topics were on the agenda for this retreat that we were holding. Most of the evenings were lectures or discussions of topics. But they wanted something different, and Ron Jew, leading the meeting, said, "Janet, how about your doing a demonstration?" I definitely did not want to do that, but naturally I agreed. Afterwards, I asked a colleague, Terry Nash, to be my guinea pig. She became excited and enthusiastically said, "I'd love to do it. But instead of a past life, Janet, I wanted you to take me to the interlife." I think the word yikes went through my mind. Although going to the interlife now is commonly a part of regression therapy, it was not so as much in 1994. I'm pretty shocked now to realize that that was 28 years ago. As a lot has happened in this field in that length of time. I guess in spite of fear of not knowing enough, I was always guided by instinct, intuition, and by the wisdom of my teachers, and sometimes the excitement of my colleagues. I'm sure this applies to every one of you in front of me. So essentially, Terry changed my demonstration plans that I didn't want to do into a past life regression, which became a real unexpected challenge for me. The setting was in a huge circle. It was a beautiful circular room at this retreat center in Scottsdale. I don't remember how many people were sitting in chairs in a large semicircle. That's one of the reasons I didn't want to do a demonstration. It were perhaps 45 or 50 people, including staff and a few speakers. When Terry, my colleague, was in an altered state of consciousness, and she was in somewhat of the she and I were sitting somewhat into the center of the semicircle. I asked her to connect with a spirit guide who could lead her to where she could go to learn what took place before her incarnation in this lifetime. we recorded it. And so that's why I can read to you Terry's words, and her clarity was amazing. As she was in the altered state and began to talk, she said, I saw myself enter a large library type of place that at first I thought contained scrolls. These scrolls held all of my experience gained from past lives on Earth. I was looking through them, viewing the experiences, and determining which of these engrams of experience I would be taking into my essence for my next soul journey into the interior of Earth. The thorough definition of an engram is memory trace. Terry continued, as I studied them, I realized that I was looking at holograms that were earned experience and therefore accessible. When Terry suddenly grasped that she was looking at holograms, she became very excited. Oh, they are holograms. They're holograms of my lives, of what I've done before. Instead of looking at a book and expecting to read, she was so excited. She said, it's like capital in a bank, and I could choose which engrams would be beneficial for achievement in the life I would be entering. She continued, the opportunity for selecting this next incarnation had been presented to me previously, another time. The choice of whether or not to accept was mine. I could say yes, or I could wait for the next one that would align the chosen soul's purpose and my physical gene pool requirement and ancestral lineage. So she was gathering all of this information about her soul's past lives. The gene pool, she says, was excellent in the incarnation that was being offered. It would serve in the activation of many of my engrams of experience in sequence. It seemed very important. If there were physical support for the activation of facets of knowledge I had already gained, the possibilities were optimum that destiny in this incarnation could be achieved. It was if I were packing a large suitcase with as much of my earned experiential knowledge from previous incarnations as it would hold. I knew my purpose in the next incarnation. It was as if I wanted to assure a successful outcome. The gene pool was there that could support the activation of each embedded experience. Terry related that certain things that she was gathering would not be activated until late in life. She expressed that, depending upon the choices that she made, it would determine the next activation. Continuing in Terry's words, as I grew into awareness of the life to come, old knowledge could be employed. It has the sense of masers, M-A-S-E-R-S. Masers, I later learned, are placed on spacecraft that travel to planets in our solar system. When a particular component is needed for research by NASA, it is turned on and triggers an activation. In Terry's words, it was exhilarating and exciting as I studied the holograms that would be valuable and useful in my next life. One difficulty in the particular combination of genes I would enter was that it could not support both intellectual and athletic skill. Apparently, I had both in my portion of my library of experience. It felt like I had to make a choice between them for potential activation in the next life. With a sigh of resignation, Terry put the athletic abilities aside, saying, intellect was vital, so I reluctantly left out my athletics. Now, again, I want to emphasize, this is Terry's interlife, the information about athletics and intellect for that particular incarnation applies to her. Continuing in Terry's words, I knew that soon I would be attending an important meeting with my guides and wise ones. It had the feeling of a committee that would review my selections and intentions for the upcoming incarnation. A feeling of excitement and anticipation prevailed. The whole time, I recall the energy present in my essence. I would overpack this time. If all the experiences were not utilized, that was all right. Better to have that happen than to need something that could have been available that I didn't include. At this point, in thinking of the upcoming meeting, Terry whispered, I have to listen very carefully. And so I leaned forward to her and said, why do you have to listen very carefully? She indicated that once before, after a successful incarnation as a healer, she indicated that she was over enthusiastic about her skills. Her guides warned her that she did not have enough strength, now in a former incarnation, that she did not have enough strength built into her essence to handle the next task she desired. Oh, I can do it. I know I can do it, she insisted. She learned that if you ask 3 times, they cannot refuse you. She said, I went into that incarnation and they were right. I was not prepared for what was needed. It was disastrous. This time, Terry knew that she needed to listen carefully to the wise ones. My comment, it appears that we are advised, but always given free will, and an opportunity to learn the hard way, if necessary. At the meeting, Terry continues, my guides and wise ones were carefully studying my engram selections, the gene pool and the family of personalities I would be entering. There were many positives and some definite negatives. It was their job to advise and warn me about potential pitfalls. The intention being that with 4 warnings in place, some part of me would remember when the challenges entered the scene of reality in my destined life. It felt good that I had overpacked. It was as if I had learned the high cost of racing and was not going to do a repeat of that costly indifference. They seemed pleased, and there was support, humor, and loving concern for success. Terry continuing. Now I will relate what it seems the driver was related to the purpose of the incarnation. And here I want you to pay attention to see how much it may apply to you. Those ready to incarnate had been requested to do this, but acceptance came totally from free will choice. And with that, all the hazards that would be prevalent. The embodiment had to happen through current Earth rules. That meant that a type of gauntlet was run with no supernatural interventions allowed. However, assistance could be asked for by each incarnated spirit and would be given at that time. Something to remember, something I used. It seemed there was a massive encounter planned, Some very old souls had already entered the earth plane and were seeding, seeding. Terry said, I think Hazel Danning and Winifred Lucas have already incarnated. They were part of the first wave. At this point, they were sitting hearing Terry's regression to the interlife. Many, many more of us were coming. Terry was then referring to herself. And our purpose was to infiltrate the darkness and create a vast light field that would shift the vibrational energy. It would be challenging. Previous times this had been attempted, and although light remained on Earth, it had not overcome the darkness in totality. It barely flickered through some of the dark ages. Terry continuing to be in the regression and describing this time the light would prevail. These millions of souls planned to be seeded into the dark and grow right up through the darkness. Before, they sort of floated on the top of the dark, hoping to be a determining influence, but it wasn't enough. My guides told me I would enter a dark place and experience alienation. They warned me this would be very difficult for my soul, as there would not be too many others in my early childhood that I knew. As I grew up through this darkness, it would serve as a sort of inoculation. As my life progressed into my later years, and my engrams of experience activated through maser-like interaction, I would emerge through this field. Terry's words and emotions really filled this large circle room. As she said, the light is not to be imposed upon others. When the light can go into the darkness and grow up through that darkness, it cannot be put out. The darkness would not be victorious, as these millions of souls would know how to deal with it. Because of the inoculation, they would not be stymied. These souls would be able to deal with darkness and hold the light in place. Terry ended the interlife experience and plan for this life by saying, my facilitator, Janet, asked me if we were succeeding. And Terry said, I said, yes, we are doing it. We are growing up through the darkness. The light will prevail. Story number 3 is completed. Holly, your turn. Where do we go?
Okay. Well, everybody can take their mutes off now if you want to share. And let's just hold up your hand because I can see everybody if anybody wants to ask questions or make comments. Virginia?
In reference to your most recent story, you asked us to pay close attention.
Yes.
Do I understand your implication that some of us or all of us are in that group?
I would say so, yes.
It sounded very familiar.
Yes, whenever I first heard that and whenever it happened at the time, I was just aware of those people who have gone to that particular training, what sent them to that particular training in consciousness, about past lives, about spiritual explorations. And so I recognized it there. And since then, I now recognize it was being so many, many different places now on the planet, with so many teachers, so many people who are doing amazing light work in the fields. And I think it's going to take millions upon millions to do what we really want to do.
Mhm.
We're talking about a shift in paradigm, and we're talking about a shift in consciousness. And I don't need to talk about the darkness that's around the planet right now, but I can see so many places that are teaching in spiritual traditions of all kinds. So yeah, Virginia, I do think yes, we are a part of it. Some have had to go through more darkness than others to pull up from it. And they become stronger and stronger as they do it.
Agreed.
Any other comments along that part too? I welcome that. They don't necessarily need to be questions.
One of the things that I'm resonating with what you shared with Carrie's experience is that we can't really make change if we just hang out in the light. We have to bring that energy into form, into structure, into the shadows, to bring a light down into that and then let it fulminate from there to transform. Otherwise, there's a disconnect. And I see a lot in the New Age world that a lot of people just want to hang out in the light. They don't have that grounding.
Mhm.
You know, we call spiritual bypassers, all kinds of terms for it. But I see that those of us who are willing to go into the darkness and do the work from that place are really doing the transformational work. And our clients show up in the darkness. That's what our work is really about.
That is really valuable thing to say, because I'm sure that all of us at different times in doing our trainings and so forth, and that we've met many people who do kind of want to stay at the top. And if, as Terry's regression said, it was tried before and it didn't work when people stayed on the top. Going into the darkness and coming up through it is what is needed, because we are learning as we do that. We are growing and expanding in consciousness and in light, I trust, as we do that.
I have a comment to share along those lines.
Sure.
The very first time I went to Virginia Beach, the Edgar Cayce Center, it was like I was home.
Yeah.
And I asked my guides, my husband could find a job here. I could find a job here. We could live here, right? Because it was easy. And they said, no, we want you where we put you in upstate New York, because we need you. That there's darkness. And then they showed me this image of the darkness and then a tree growing up and reaching out over the top of it, just like you described. And I went, rats. But
yeah,
yes, we are where we are needed.
very good point. Very
We
good
are where
point.
we are needed.
Yes. Yeah. And good heavens, I don't want to offend anyone, but good heavens, I'm in Tennessee now.
Well, there's a lot of people that are doing this work that are doing it in the darkness, and you wouldn't know that they're doing it because it is so dark. I'm not calling, you know,
That's
a lot of
true.
closet New Ager people that have gone into the depths and that are doing the transformational work now.
Yeah.
That's why this community is so important, to have the support and connection of others will help them in that darkness tremendously, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you do past life work and work through those difficult human experiences that we've all had, we develop a capacity to hold the light, because we know that that's not the ultimate truth down there in that darkness. We know that that's the fulcrum through which we have to karmically do the work to evolve. So we're not in it so much. We can be, what I meant to say is we're in it, not of it, that we don't live in that darkness, even though we wallow in it with our clients and have it in our own lives.
Right. I was listening to a talk man's first name was Nathan. Sorry, I can't give you any more information right now. I watched a lot of different things when my retirement out here. But he said he just had like a couple of sentences that flew together saying, there is no past life or future life. There is an ongoing life. It's a constancy. And I thought, oh, I've never heard it explained that way. Interesting.
Yeah.
I always find myself preferring to use the term other life rather than past because of our tendency in our culture to see things linearly with time.
Right.
So many years ago, I started using the term other life to kind of try to unhook myself and my clients from the concept of, linear past, present, and future. And what you just said kind of, affirms that.
Right.
I'm a gardener, so I was thinking, well, everybody's talking about the dark and the essential need to stay grounded, like you mentioned, Janet, in so many of your experiences. It was your groundedness that really got you through and helped you help the others.
Yeah.
If you look at gardening, seeds require the darkness to germinate. So life requires the darkness to emerge. So I think that's a very good analogy. I learned so much from gardening. And I think, the need for all of us to ground in whatever ways we're drawn to stay grounded is so essential to do this work.
Yeah. And to ask for help when we need it, whether we call it your higher self or God consciousness, whatever name you give to it, to know that you are asking for a higher guidance, and it comes. I had an interesting experience, which doesn't have much to do with anything other than I think it's just real cute. My son Dan was going to a business meeting where he was invited to, and this is in Tennessee, and I live with that family, my son and his family. And so he was invited to go to this brunch breakfast, and there was going to be a speaker, and they were all businessmen and people in the community. And Dan, who works from home, decided, he would go. The pandemic was over and he would go. And so it was interesting. He enjoyed it. It was an interesting gathering with men. He connected with some of them. And then the speaker stepped up and gave a rather strong Christian message in the speech. And afterwards, the men who invited Dan, they were talking, and he said, I don't know how you felt about that speech, but if you want to, you're welcome to come at any time. If you don't want to, that's okay too. What church do you go to? And Dan said, kind of escaping a little bit, when I do, I sometimes have gone to the Unitarian Universalist church. And the man said, and I thought this was hilarious, oh, you're one of those who goes, and he said it with humor, not accusing. Oh, you're one of those who goes with, you're one of those who prays to whom it may concern. I think it's great.
The best way I've ever heard it described.
Unitarian Universalist. To whom it may concern. You may want to use it sometime.
Janet, I have a question. It's a little off topic, but it involves your third story about the holograms.
Yes.
So were the holograms visual representations of what? The engrams, is that what you said?
No, the holograms, Terry expected to see writing whenever she went into the library. She
Yeah,
expected big books of writing, and some people do see that
Yeah.
in an interlife experience. For her, instead of the images like that in writing or pictures, she saw them as holograms. And in that, it was 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, I don't know. But in that way, she could see more fully into her essence of who she was and more about herself. So it was much deeper, I would say, than she would have been describing if it was much deeper in her experience, I should say, than reading books in the library.
so it was an information packet within the hologram? Is that what you, insight within?
It was individually, this past life and that past life and that past
Okay.
life.
Okay,
Yeah.
so kind of like Shirley MacLaine saw in Defending Your Life. Do you remember that movie?
It's been a long time ago. I'm not remembering.
It was a long time ago, yeah, but I think that came similar to the movie.
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm asking because
Interesting.
my son is working with new technology with holograms,
Oh, yes.
and he's very tuned into energy and light. And it's just, when you said holograms, I was wondering what her experience was with it.
Is he working with the metaverse in some?
With augmented reality.
Okay. Mhm.
He and his programming partner are developing new technology, but it's with the holograms, which, I experienced it, and it's surreal.
Oh, I bet.
Not coming
Yeah.
again. Sorry.
Yeah, I bet.
Thanks.
I can't help but wonder. I mean, there's so much that is happening right now with speed. I mean, things are moving fast. And I can't help but wonder, what is it going to be like I would have said a long time ago, we would have said 50 years. Now I'm going to say, what's it going to be like in 10 years? What's it going to be like in 15 years for my little grandson and my young adult granddaughters? It's moving so fast. And I like to think of it as being very positive and good, in spite of the news that I often watch too much of. But I will say also that I see good things happening in the news as well. So I don't want to leave it with that impression.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Peter.
You had talked about the women in the Egyptian experience.
Yeah.
Any ahas for the group or individually for those women who participated?
Oh, you mean from the group that I was with?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What comes to me at the moment is that I think that the one who perceived Ron as being his wife in the past life was able to calm it down over a period of time and just begin to move into the space of more reality of where she was, and recognize that, okay, these are parts of me from a past life, still a part of me. And so I think working it out for her, and for Elizabeth, probably the same thing. So it was more of their ability to work through what was happening and what they were seeing and was frightening and scary, but also what was a recognition, I would say, for them, a recognition of parts of themselves.
There are no accidents here. How interesting that they came together and had that experience, and you did a masterful job of helping them heal in a way, or to take that steps in that process.
And I guess that's what I want to put across, is that I didn't know what I was doing. And I think I've explained that with my talk. A lot of times it was confusing, it was uncertain, And all that I knew, I wasn't questioning, that was, I guess, what I'm going to tell you. I wasn't questioning it whenever I was in it. I knew that I could ask for help. And I knew that the help came. So it was not an intellect of evaluating at that point. It was just moving was where I was being guided to go. And
Getting
I
out.
learned to trust it. Yeah.
Everybody feel complete? Okay. Janet,
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank you.
So
It was just fun to do, fun to talk to you about it. And for me to go back and remember, and now I can go retire again.
Well, it's like listening to an audiobook, Janet. Yours.
Oh, interesting. I've
Yeah.
never thought of that before, but who knows?
Well, it's recorded now, right?
Yes, it is. It'll be on YouTube.
Oh.
So it's a mini audiobook, Janet. And I bet you have more stories. So come back again and tell us more of your anomalous experiences. I'm sure there are more than 3.
I picked out the most exciting ones.
That's wonderful.
Oh, there are probably
Yeah.
more exciting ones and insightful ones.
It's been lovely. Thank you all very much.
So much.
Thank you,
And
Janet.
hopefully we'll see
Thank you, Janet.
next month when Virginia does her angel presentation.
Ah,